Okay, hi Professor. Sorry about the crazy camera work from the beginning. I don't have anybody to record this for me, so I'm thinking I'll just show you my PowerPoint slide and talk in the background, and I hope that works. So here we go, let's get started. So I did my project on geometry. The lesson plan that I originally used was called Planning and Making a Quilt. Give it a second to focus. The original existing lesson plan was students creating a quilt using 3 transformations and investigating ways shapes can be colored to show 1/2 and 1/4. They did this by coloring 3 different squares that were given out to the students, and the examples were shown on a overhead projector, is what the lesson plan recommends. They used lines of symmetry, and then the students had to use geometrical and fractional terms to describe the quilt square. They were in groups of 4, and then they had to make note of it in a journal. The original lesson plan also had many questions to ask the students, which I did go ahead and keep. I thought they were really great questions, and I thought that it was a good way to get the students interacting and really understand what they were able to understand and assess how they learned. One of the other things I liked about the lesson plan was that it had a teacher reflection section, which I noticed a lot of lesson plans do not have. It kind of gives you the idea of how to look back on what you did and whether the lesson worked well or if it didn't work well. As far as what I wanted to change for the lesson, so for the analysis of the original lesson plan, one of the things I thought I would change was some of the objectives. So I changed some of the objectives. I changed it to a 6x6 square, 6 inch by 6 inch square, so that you can show more surface area, so it would be easier for the students to work with. I did create a 4-patch quilt, using flip slides and turns. That goes along with the standard. I also kept using proper geometric and fractional terms to describe the quilt, and the locate lines of symmetry. The other thing I added to it was to show cooperation and working with a partner. So I reduced the group size down to a group of 2, so that they can work one-on-one with each other. And if I was actually implementing the lesson plan, I would try to group together a student that I know is really well in geometry with a student that struggles maybe a little bit with geometry, so that they can work off each other and be helpful. I also changed the materials needed for the project. I thought it would be a lot more fun and exciting to bring in a bunch of different designs of fabric rather than having the students color it, and have them cut that into the shapes that they need to create the squares. In the launch section, what I did was students will explore many different quilts, and compare them. So I thought about bringing in some old quilts, and tying it into history and bringing back, the history of quilts and how quilts were formed and why people made quilts and which brings in the story that I chose, which was My Grandmother's Patchwork Quilt by Jane Bolton. That's a story about a grandmother who puts together a quilt and how she, takes her time to choose the design and really makes a nice quilt. So I thought it was a good way to tie in a history lesson along with the math lesson. And again, the students would be put into groups of 2. They'd be, I will give out all the materials and encourage the students to work together. Whereas in the first lesson, yes, they were working together, but they were each designing their own square. I want the students to work together to design all the squares together, to see how well that works out for them. In the explore phase, what I did was sorry, I was just checking to see if it was still recording. Each group will design a square where 1/2 is one color, and then 1/4 is another color or design, and then another quarter is yet another color or design, depending on the fabrics that I'm able to come up with. Once they design the square, then they have to cut the fabric to fit and figure out the geometric shapes that fit into that 6x6 square. And again, it's making it out of, one piece that constitutes 1/2 of the square, and then 2 pieces that constitute 1/4 of the square. And then the students are going to also find the lines of symmetry. I would also add that they didn't have in the original lesson plan, again, is the to keep the directions up on the board, so that the instructions are there visible to the students, and they can see and don't have to ask so many questions if they weren't paying attention or forgot what they were supposed to be doing. And then another thing I noticed in the original lesson plan that I changed was that while the students are working, I'm going to walk around and ask questions to get them thinking about different ways they can create a square. How they need to turn the shape that they cut out so that it fits the square and fits, within the fractional parameters. I'll also ask the students what shape they think will work best and why it would work best, so that it gets them thinking more about, well, maybe this shape will work, or if I flip this or slide this, to turn it and make it make it fit within the fractional parameters that they were given. Then I'll ask the students to ask each other questions about how best to make it work. As far as the summarize stage, I think what I would do is have the students each as they finish their squares, present it together as a group, both come up and present it together as a group, have them point out the 1/2 and which part is a quarter, and then discuss why they chose those shapes and how did it all fit together. And then I'm going to keep the part of having them record their findings in their math journals. I do math journaling with my kindergartners, and it really does work out well. It helps them go back and reflect on what they've learned, and if they have questions, they can go back and see what their thought process was and how they came to that conclusion. The students will also reflect on how they can tell the fractional parameters apart. How can they tell the difference between 1/2 and 1/4? And then also I will pose all the questions that I have in my PowerPoint, which half of the design worked best, those kinds of things. How did you find the line of symmetry, and was there more than one, those kinds of things. As far as assessing the students, I think that I don't really want to give them a formal assessment just on one particular lesson plan. Of course, eventually they'll have to have some sort of test based on the whole unit. But I think I want them to be able to tell me the names and the effects of the moves on the different shapes, how to determine the equal parts of the whole, and the fractional names of 1/2 and 1/4 and how they use those correctly, and also how to find the lines of symmetry. And that's basically how I'll assess them. I think I'll just keep track of how they answer the discussion questions and see who has a really good understanding of it. And then, also just put together all the squares and make a classroom quilt and have some fun with it. And then I thought, as an extension for the math lesson itself, is to really have somebody come in and teach them actually how to sew, so that they can take those fabric pieces and actually sew them together into a quilt. Thought that would be fun. The standards being given were the 2 basic standards for geometry in 3rd through 5th grade, which was to describe the location and movement using common language and geometric vocabulary, and then to predict and describe the results of sliding, flipping, and turning 2-dimensional shapes. So I think that was pretty well accomplished in the lesson plan, in both the original lesson plan and the few little changes that I did make. I know I didn't make too many changes to the lesson plan, but I think that in what I did change, kind of enhanced it and made it a little bit more fun. So I hoped you liked my project, and I had a really great semester, and I hope you have a great summer. Thanks, Professor.